My name is Jason Brett, and I host Product Coffee here almost every week throughout the year. Some mornings we do it at 7:30 Eastern, some mornings at 11:30 Eastern. But the goal is to get product professionals together to learn with each other, build community, and help each other solve our problems and the things that are important to help us move forward in our careers and create more impactful, successful products in the marketplace. And today's program actually is coming directly from a bunch of conversations that John Mansour alluded to just a moment ago as well. There are a lot of questions going on, and I'll introduce our guests here in just a moment. But I've heard a lot of comments where people have said, I've even heard the statement, CX is the new product management. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that might mean. And is it a true statement, or is there just such a huge synergy and overlap between these disciplines that we need to pay close attention to them? Before we get into our actual program, though, I do want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors. We've got three great sponsors who make this product coffee series possible. And I want to give thanks to Method, and we've got a few people from Method on the call today. Method is a software design and development agency that leans very heavily into customer experience and digital transformation. We have quite a few product strategists and world-class designers, as well as engineering resources to help our customers identify their CX problems and solve them through technology, as well as through service design and so on and so forth. I also work for Method, coincidentally, so it's very difficult for me to treat them as just a sponsor. There's a lot of family here as well. So I also want to thank Pragmatic Institute, who's been around the product management community since the very beginning of the product management community. Has trained thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of product managers around the world in the pragmatic framework. And they've been supporting this program since the very beginning. And Feature Upvote, who provides our ideas forum at productcoffee.com/ideas, where you can go and make suggestions for the types of topics you'd like to see us cover here on Product Coffee and vote for the suggestions that are already out there. You can see Feature Upvote in action, and you can deploy this great voice of customer tool for your own audience with a very fast implementation. So I highly recommend checking them out, and really appreciate their support of Product Coffee since the very beginning as well. As I said a moment ago, today's session is the Product Manager's Guide to CX. And this came about due to a lot of questions that I've been hearing around what is the nature of CX as a profession. I'm starting to see CXO as a title that companies are recruiting for and hiring for ahead of CX. And there are a lot of conversations that really overlap product management responsibilities with CX responsibilities. And there are some major areas of overlap and synergy, but there are also some real differences between those as well. So we wanted to set up a session today and talk a little bit about that. And in order to do that, we collaborated with the CXPA. You saw Mike Bowers and Jerry and Bruce and Marcos here, all members of CXPA, and would really and welcome this collaborative event, this co-presented event. But we invited a couple of very special speakers, panelists today, and I want to introduce them to you right now. The first is I want to welcome Marcos Arias. And Marcos actually has the the credit or the accusation of being the first person to hire me as a product manager. I came to work for Marcos way back in, I think it was 2006 at Bell South. And he was a part of the product management team there, needed someone on contract to do some things. And that's where I discovered this career of product management in a very direct way, and have built my career since then. We worked together for about 3 years, and then we've kind of gone our separate ways since then, but it's been a great relationship. Marcos has led product management teams at AT&T and a variety of other organizations. And over the last 5 years has made a shift into this CX discipline where he's recognized globally as a thought leader in CX. So we want to welcome Marcos, and glad to have you here, Marcos. Anything else you want to say to introduce yourself here?
Just that hiring Jason was one of the best decisions I've ever done. And I'm not just saying that because he's coordinating this. It was a boon to myself and the organization. And he's just done wonders, in product management, of course. And then the other thing I would say is I'm very happy and honored to be here and meeting some very dedicated, product managers and, of course, CX professionals on here.
Well, thank you, Marcos. Welcome. And we're going to dig into picking your brain here in just a minute. And the next person I want to introduce is Lisa Crimes. And welcome back, Lisa. Lisa, similarly, we've been friends for over a decade. She came to the very first Product Camp Atlanta, and I think that's how we actually met. And Lisa has been out there in the Twitter sphere and in the on LinkedIn and publishing and writing about product management for years, really helping to push the understanding of what great product management looks like, and similarly has moved into roles really more defined as CX leadership roles in several companies over the last 5 years or so. So I invited, and you are currently the head of product and customer experience at, what's the name of the company now, Lisa?
So I'm just actually I'm fractional currently. I've just left full time in the startup world, which was a fantastic opportunity to be chief revenue officer, owning product sales and marketing, but in the startup space. So now I'm doing that with a number of companies, including the Health Innovation Lab in New York, HIT Lab. So having a great time working with several different customers.
Excellent. And so glad to have you here, Lisa. It's been a great collaboration over the years, and I'm really looking forward to your insights and discussion today as well. So thank you so much. So having said that, let's just kind of dig into our discussion for the day. And I want to start with just some definitions. By the way, one more ground rules setting here. I've got some questions that we've talked about. We've had a little bit of discussion leading up to this event, but I really want to hear your questions as well. So if we touch on something that you want to explore deeper, or if you want to dig in and ask a question and go down a path that we're not going down, raise your virtual hand using the reactions panel at the bottom of your Zoom client and do that. And you can even, if you just can't wait, just go ahead and jump in. That's okay. We're all friends here. So we'll keep moving through this. But I want to start with, let's just talk about what customer experience is. And Marcos, let me start with you. Would you give me your definition of what the customer experience discipline is and what customer experience management really is? What do you think?
Well, when people talk to me about what customer experience is, I always say, talk to 20 people and you will get 20 answers about what customer experience is. And it goes through the gamut. I mean, you have people who say, hey, customer experience is about how people find you, in the online digital world, or it's customer success and account management. Or if you're talking to sales would say, I do customer experience because I own the customer relationship. And then you go to customer service and support, and they go, no, that's mine. I'm customer experience. And of course, UX is one in which folks say, no, that's the experience. That's mine. So every single answer you get is correct. They're each a part of customer experience. But the totality of the customer experience is really back to the customer, which is what is their perception and their emotional attachment through every interaction they have, all the people they talk to, and the technology that they actually use or interact with. And so it's like very, very broad, in that sense. And it's truly end to end, because the customer journey goes through the whole life cycle goes through every single one of those places that we talked about before. And if you look at that and you say, okay, end to end, all those touch points, all those people, all those interactions, it's that perception and emotional connection that's like driving that. And the practice, the customer experience practice and management, it is a set of practices. It is one that relates to the culture of the organization when it comes to customer centricity. It relates to, how do you structure the systems and the organization for customer experience success. It is the actual processes that are put in place and how you have those established across the organization. And it's also, and this is very key, and this is one that like really needs to be strengthened. It is how do you, through this customer experience management, realize the return back to the business, the return on this set of practices that you put in place. Because when you're talking to all the other folks across the disciplines, and you're talking to the C-suite, they go, did you increase revenue? Did you save cost? Did we retain customers? That's the trifecta. And so that's kind of a long-winded answer to what is customer experience and what is customer experience management. But I again open it up to other folks to chime in as well.
A couple of things that you said there really struck me. And one is you specifically intentionally layered in technology as part of it. So customer experience includes technology. And the other thing that you really focused in on there that struck me is the notion of how do we really measure a return on the work that we're doing here? Because so many of these concepts around what good customer experience is can be perceived as very qualitative, but ultimately they do have to map back to returns. Lisa, what say you?
I think those were great. I mean, there was a lot of things that I'm so glad that you pointed out, which are one is the culture, right? I mean, because that is something, and especially when you think about how that compares maybe to product management a little bit, is you're thinking about the customer's end-to-end journey, but who delivers that? And that's your employees, right? I mean, that's also the people behind it, and understanding how you hire and the way you train and the way you indoctrinate people into your brand and your culture is a piece of that. So I'm so glad that you spoke to that as well. But then, at the end of the day, it does, I tie everything back to revenue and to success and the business. So what business are you in and how are you going to make money at that? And both CX and product management can be about that. They are just getting there, from a little slightly different perspective, right? So yeah, I think, I think we nailed it in terms of the definition of customer experience. If I start to kind of dig in and think a little bit more about, maybe even some more of the comparison, with product management a little bit, there are, I don't maybe show if we can figure out how long people have been in product management. But when I started in it 20 years ago, there wasn't I think there was one book that existed on product management, and there wasn't a lot of people that even knew what it was other than the brand managers. So, there was a lot of education of teaching the organization about what it was and why we were doing what we were doing. And very similar to customer experience, it would be, some departments would say, no, we own what you're saying. It's like, well, you really don't. You're not looking at all of it. You're not looking at sales, marketing, operations, and how the product is, delivered end to end, or even contracting. And so again, very similar to customer experience, where we're having to educate on what it is, but you're also looking at, end to end and that full journey.
And to me, that sounds like really kind of one of the hallmarks of thinking of customer experience as a discipline, similar to product management. Product management is a function that has to exist within an organization that has products. Product managers are not individually responsible or are not individually capable of doing everything that has to be done in order for a company to deliver products. Just like no individual can impact every area that creates a customer experience, but there have to be caretakers of it. There have to be those who are evangelizing and thinking about how can we as an organization deliver better products or deliver better customer experiences. And that's one of my takeaways from what you were saying, Lisa, is it's really about the discipline of evangelizing great customer experience throughout the organization, not so much thinking about who owns the customer, because everyone does, but how do we make sure that we're all doing our part to deliver great experience?
That's exactly it. And, making sure those individual silos are connected, everyone's doing their contribution and doing a great job at that. But if they're not connected, the customer doesn't care, right? I mean, they want to see the overall experience of it all. So they don't want to understand your internal departments and silos and how that's done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll bring a point about when I was in product development, product management in my early days. And a lot of folks, with their set of products, were very happy when they got to launch. It was always about getting to launch. Mm-hmm. And then there would be a bunch of high fives, rightfully so. You got to launch. But then there was this sort of, okay, go off and sell. There's the product. Hope you do good. and one of the directors came to me in customer support, and he says, look, I hate it when you launch something. And he meant you as in the big collective product management group, you. He says, because I'm the one who gets the calls when it screws up. I'm the one who has to deal with the hurt and the pain from the customers as they're trying to figure out what you just tossed over the wall. And that was an aha to me and part of my evolution of saying, oh, a real successful product and a product launch and a product life cycle is one in which you go, I'm not just tossing it over the wall. It is one about making sure I see the whole life cycle of that product and understand how the customer is interacting and engaging, and then of course, benefiting from the product that has been launched. So it includes all the stuff that you have to do prior to launch, which is understand, what is the need, what are you trying to build for the customer, what solution are you solving, how are they going to use it, all those things. But even after launch, to say, oh, how are they in onboarding, how are they engaging, how are they using, and then of course, is it supported appropriately? Are there questions being answered? All those things, and including billing. One of the big banes of a product is the billing just seems to screw things up for the customer, and the whole experience is tainted because everything else was going good until they got something messed up on the billing side. So I only say that because in my evolution in product development management, that was the moment when I said, ooh, I need to think bigger. And I need to think more so from the customer's point of view, and those customer focus groups and that is understanding, and the surveys and the feedback was so critical to a successful product.
Absolutely. And that kind of gets back to the statement that we were talking about for those of you who are watching the recording. As we were doing the roundtable earlier, one of the things that we talked about is this idea that great product managers really have to have that full end-to-end understanding of great customer experience. And that has led to a need for people to look outside of the product, with the product as a piece of the whole customer experience that you were talking about earlier as well, Marcos. Lisa, I think it's really cool to hear about Marcos's evolution from pure product into this CX, this larger CX role. How about yours? How did you get there? How did you make that evolution?
Well, I feel I've got to go back a little bit until this part of the story before I can tell you how I got to CX. But a lot of people know I'm in healthcare technology, which is just where my passion is. I've done a little work outside of healthcare, but I started on the customer side. I worked in a doctor's office when I was working on my undergraduate degree for many years, for 7 or 8 years. And I moved from the clinical side into the billing office, implemented electronic claims. If anybody, I just really aged myself right there. But we replaced our DOS-based practice management system that I had really this aptitude to understand. I was understanding reporting and all the things that everybody wanted. We went through a selection process to replace it. And then, we picked one and I went through that implementation. And I was sold that I wanted to be in the technology world. So I moved over to an anesthesiology billing company that was then bought by InfoCure, if anybody remembers them, in Atlanta, that became VitalWorks, PracticeWorks, now Cerner, and Kodak. And I was on the help desk, right? Then team lead, then customer support manager. And then I finished my MBA and I saw the role of a product manager. Didn't know what it was. And I'm like, this is me. This is taking I was the customer, came from the customer side. I've learned the technology side, and I did so well in customer support because I understood the customers, but I knew how to speak their language, but I knew how to speak the language to the developers, right? And to our technology people. So then now I have an MBA and I combine the finance and the marketing side and the bigger requirements all together. And I feel product management has defined the rest of my career. So when I moved to CX, it was because I was in an organization. I was brought in to solve some, it was a transformation effort. That's exactly where I started. I brought in my buddy John to Mensur to help me roll out the product management framework because that's what they needed. They needed to understand how to align the market, their customers from this more portfolio perspective. And they needed a framework to do it. They needed to know how to be tied to revenue. Before, they all thought they were customer focused just because they were like custom development, right? They were, I call that order takers. That's not product management and that's not CX. So had some success with product management, getting the framework, but then there were a lot of things that were happening in healthcare. This has now been 9 years, I guess, where healthcare was starting to grow from a consumer perspective, especially in the payer world, where they had always sold B2B, like to brokers in the past. Now they were really selling with the ACA, Obamacare. They were selling to the consumers and they needed to have a very different view. So I pitched the idea of a customer experience department. So I wrote my own job description around chief experience officer. I brought in my other buddy, Jerry Seifert, to help me in the early days as we were thinking about this, because I knew he understood the process side, he knew product management, and he knew CX, right? So building off of what John had already helped us launch, we went down this process. So, it goes from there. But even my very first opportunities explaining what customer experience was to an organization that thought they were already customer obsessed, I had to bring a lot of my product management stories and collaborate very closely with product management. They didn't quite get it. At the time, the guy leading product management didn't quite understand it, but wanted to and wanted to support the effort. So he's like, okay, all right, I've got a UI project for you. Literally, he thought that was what we were. We must be, if we're CX, we must be UX. Therefore, we can fix the UI. And I knew it was more than that. So I said, no, fine, we'll take it. Well, guess what? It was a customer service application, right? I mean, it was we exploded from there because we took that project where the product management thought they had a UI problem. We knew that it was more of it could likely be a UX, a usability issue, but it was far greater than that. I mean, we had to, it was strategy. It was executives going, no, these are our health plans going, we need to understand our customers, our consumers, and this product is what we have, and you don't get it. So it all really literally built off of that first project is how I was able to get some early successes.
It's funny, Lisa, because when I was in product management, I felt very, how would I say, enthused and fulfilled. And the reason why, and probably it's something wired in my brain, was that product and product management was the hub. And what I mean by that concept of the hub was it literally interacted with everybody in the enterprise, whether you were talking to labs and engineering, if you have a network group, you were talking to network, you were talking to field technicians, you were talking to customer support, you were talking to marketing, sales, everybody, account management, billing. There wasn't a soul that you weren't touching in the organization as product management. You had to integrate, and it takes a village in order to understand it and of course, launch something successful and then see it through its life cycle and enhance it along the way. You were the hub. And where I'm going with this is, as I evolved and, when I was asked by my VP to go from just pure product management to customer experience, in that evolution, it was so natural for me because customer experience, back to the previous definitions we were talking about, interacts with every single part of the organization. Even supply chain is absolutely a customer experience place, because if you're delivering something and it's not to the expected promise of, when you told the customer, even if it's early, it's bad, let alone late. But, supply chain, getting it through the warehouse and making sure they deliver it when it was expected was important for the experience as well. So CX is talking to everyone in the business and to product as well. So it was a natural evolution for me because it was literally the same kind of hub, thought, or the hub, concept that I talked about being realized in CX.
Yeah, I think those are that well said, Marcus, because that's a lot of, when my early days of transitioning over, I remember attending some of this CX meetings, right? The association meetings, and someone asked me, how long have I been in customer experience? And I went, 10 years, because it's the same thing. I've been in product management and I was focused on the customer experience. And if I'm really honest about it, I was struggling with a few things that I felt were happening with companies not understanding product management. I know John remembers this because I expressed I think there was a product camp session on this where I was expressing frustration that product management was kind of getting pulled back into being too technical and they were missing the overall experience. So a lot of me even pitching the chief experience officer role was like, you know what? I'm going to do product management, and they don't get it. What they're calling product management isn't product management. So I'm just going to go over here and do it. And this is what's going to, because that's what the company needs to connect everything. And they need to be obsessed over their customer, but by understanding the market and understanding the revenue and connecting all the dots across those. So I just feel like I called it something different, but at the end of the day, it's what you do and where you drive the value.
So I really like what you touched on there, and I want to dig in a little bit deeper to it. So you're both saying very clearly that product management and customer experience have very similar objectives, if not the same objectives. You have to understand the needs of your user or your customer, and you have to properly translate this into how the business or the product is going to need to function, what those requirements look like. But what are the differences if you start to bifurcate what product management is as a discipline versus what customer experience is as a discipline? What are some of the big differences so that someone can look and say, yes, I understand the value of both, but this is where I think I fit?
I mean, I'll jump in on this one. I think that it comes down to the skill set. And Jason, I love the way that you said before, what did you say? That you, as a product manager, you can be CX, but not the other way around. Is that how you said it?
What I said is that a great product manager must be great at CX, have a good CX understanding, and understand how to make those connections across the entire life cycle. A great CX professional doesn't necessarily have to have product management skills. They need to understand how, as Marco said earlier, how the product fits in, but they don't need to be a product manager necessarily. So you can have one without the other.
I think that paints a nice picture around it. And so I don't disagree with that. There are some skills under CX that are, using more, human-centered design techniques and tools that can be used in product management, that can be used throughout the rest of the organization. Product management needs to understand their the particular customer in the market and what the opportunities are that are connected to that. CX needs to understand that, but they're not driving it. They're not driving new solutions, but what they're hearing from customers could feed into product management. Product management should literally be the experts in their field, whereas CX, meaning in their particular domain, they need to learn that if they didn't have it. They need to look at things from an overall, how are you going to take things to market? How are you going to be successful with those? Kind of that go-to-market side. CX has tools that will be helpful to that, but they don't own go-to-market. So those are some of the things that jump out to me as differences.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would see that, there's obviously a strong tie and relationship of CX as input, and then of course as feedback back out, from product management. The drive of the product, the drive of the gates that are taken in product management and product development, the technical pieces and the details involved in that go-to-market definitely, reside more in the PM side. And when you look at the CX side, it's about the, engagement and the emotional connection and the, use and that perceptions that, like, all this good stuff that the product is doing instills in the customer. And so they're talking to each other. And if they're not talking to each other, they need to be.
Totally agreed. It's such a partnership, and done well, both are going to be successful as a result of it. One of the other things when I pitched it as a separate department, and not everybody may agree with this, but I pitched that customer experience as a department could probably go away at some point. I wanted to work myself out of that role because I wanted CX to become part of the DNA of the organization. And I still feel that way, that you maybe don't need a CX department, whereas you do need product management. You still have to have that function, and you need to have individuals that own that area of the business. But CX, if it's done right and well, you could possibly have that infused throughout the organization, and then maybe it fits within product management at some point. Depends on the organization.
Lisa, I've said to myself, if everyone really owns the customer experience, then obviously the need for a CX department should not, be separate and distinct. It's because everybody's doing it. The only, thing that I would say that, take the other side or take a different approach would be, well, when we have product, we also have quality assurance. And a great product doesn't need quality assurance because you did everything you were supposed to do to deliver quality in the first place. However, we do have quality assurance.
What was the model number of that Motorola pager that they determined it was just cheaper to throw them away than to try to fix them?
Yeah, exactly.
They had no quality problem.
So CX, if you take that analogy, that rough analogy of QA with product, CX still has a part to play, a very important part to play, even if everybody's like really committed to the customer, because it's still one of those things that says, let's not forget the focus. Let's not forget the focus, the evangelization we were talking about before, the need to be customer centric, because we're all busy and we're all focused on, got to get this done, got to get this done. And having somebody on your shoulder helpful saying, don't forget the customer experience. Don't forget that we're doing this for the customers and the customers are paying us, to give some benefit back to them is helpful. I need that help sometimes. I need somebody reminding me in my ear when my head is down, wait a minute, don't forget, who really is paying the bills around here. So, that's just an additional thought there.
I mentioned employee experience earlier. I never intended to go down a path around employee experience when I started the whole CX thing, but it naturally happened because I realized that HR was looking internally and marketing was looking externally. And so they both needed to understand the brand of the organization and who who were the customers, right? And connecting the dots between those. So, that is kind of a slightly different view of what I said earlier, that, so CX, by owning and expanding to employee experience, can really be a gap in a company.
It's funny. I have to add this at this point. There is a term that's been, floated around about something called experience management. And experience management says, okay, you got CX, which is customer focused. You got EX, which is employee focused, and then you got BX, which is just because we need another acronym,
Sure.
BX being business experience. But the reality is, I've always said this from the beginning of moving into customer experience. If you're doing customer experience right, you have to have EX within that thinking, within the practice, because through your employees and their experience that they have and the customer experience as it's been defined before, you are going to drive the business forward. You're going to drive the business in doing that trifecta I talked about before. So to me, the true implementation of customer experience and the management of that always included employee experience, always included the business piece of it, of how the business is going to be organized and structured and the system set up and the culture set up. It's in there. Otherwise, it's only a part of the picture.
So I want to dig in on a couple of things that have kind of come up in this last little thread together. And there's also a couple of comments that I noticed that I hope we can circle back on as well. But I want to start with a comment that John Mansour just made, that, in his opinion, there needs to be a quarterback or a traffic cop to oversee the entire customer experience across all the touch points. And Lisa, you talked about carving out a role as a CXO, and Marcos, you're talking about CX and EX and BX and how all those things work together, or do they work as one? And we've talked about the difference between product management and customer experience management. I also pasted in here a few minutes ago a link to an article that I saw on Forbes a few weeks ago and it's an older article. It's from 2020, I think, but it was about, maybe this notion and title of a CXO might be a temporary thing. But that brings around a really interesting discussion about where does CX need to live explicitly within an organization? Is it a specific function that reports somewhere? Where does it live? How does it exist within an organization, in your opinion, in an ideal world? And when we really master CX, where does it live in the organization? Why don't you start with that, Marcos?
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions about this one, so thank you. There needs to be a head of CX at the table with the C-suite. That is really my fundamental belief, because if that level is not bought in, constantly being attuned and reminded about why we're here as an organization, either for the member if it's nonprofit, or for the patient if it's healthcare, or for the customer if it's just a for-profit business. If we're not reminded about it, it's so easy to go back to previous kind of stereotypes and thinking and way of looking at the business. And you need that CXO at the table with the C-suite. That's first and foremost. With that said, you also need to have it ingrained within the business units, so that like folks are there, not almost like you have a finance person that's attuned to a business unit, you have a legal group that's attuned to the business unit, and you have an experience that like could be attuned to the business unit, and then you bring it in at the whole level with the CXO and that level. I think both are required and necessary. I have seen CX rationalized under sales. I have seen CX rationalized under marketing. I have seen CX rationalized under customer support. So people have taken different ways of like saying where CX belongs. So, even product. I had somebody in IT owning CX. And, you may have heard of this individual who worked for a golf cart company. And so he was working CX through the IT department. But, I just mentioned where I believe it belongs, as a distinct, role at the C-suite, and then, integrated into the business units.
So you're saying a distinct titled role in the C-suite. My question is, can another C leader in that suite actually be that owner of CX? Could it be the CTO? Could it be the CPO or the CMO or the CRO? Or do you need a dedicated CXO who is not responsible for one of those other traditional branches?
I think the answer is yes and yes. It can the best model, in my opinion, is a CX role owning it, being that quarterback across the enterprise. But to the part that you said within your question, could it reside under another C-suite role? Absolutely, if it's implemented appropriately. And they take that part of the responsibility as strong as they take their original role. If I'm in marketing and I have CX under me, then as much attention as I give marketing, I give CX. If they don't do that, then they're short shifting that particular discipline. I don't know, Lisa, what do you think?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. What I like about it having it as a standalone separate discipline reporting to the CEO is it brings that attention and it brings the focus to it, right? So especially when you're going through and shifting the organization to start to think this way, having that dedicated role is going to be critical, right? Can you also do that through a committee, an advisory board to the company that I see someone from the C-suite, leads or, sits under that organization? Yeah, maybe, and I like the way you said is like, as long as they take that just as seriously as, everything else that they're doing. The challenge with it, and I know I said earlier that, I wanted to work myself out of the role, but it was more about helping everybody to understand what CX is and what the importance of it is. I think the issue that you're going to end up with is, if you don't have a dedicated CX role, is everybody is going to, they think that, their area is they sort of protect it. So let's just say marketing becomes the one that owns CX. Then they're going to go, well, that's just marketing. That's just their, how can marketing get involved with HR or employee experience? Or how can marketing get involved with what we're doing on the product side? So it's going to be a little bit of a organizational, it could be conflicting if the different departments and organizations don't work well together. By having it separate with CEO driven support around it, it forces everyone to see it as connecting everyone.
I also find myself wondering how much that answer changes based on what the primary revenue stream of an organization is. So for example, if I am a products-based company that primarily creates its own products and sells them, versus a company that is a distributor of products that they don't necessarily create, invent, and manufacture themselves, versus a company that is a services-based company that primarily makes their revenue by helping people through a stage or through a process in some way, shape, or form. Does the answer to that question of where the CX head lives, does that change based on the type of company that you are?
I had a discussion with someone just yesterday, and his name was Alan Breckman. He's with the Freshworks. He's pretty. I found him fascinating. He's a thought leader for that group. And when we were talking, he said, product management, the idea of you're producing a product will evolve to you're producing an experience. And I know that can be a little thought-provoking to this group here, but I saw where he was going with that. If your business is this, my product is my business, then the two just are one and the same, in that case. My product is my business. So that experience is my business.
My question is, in that case, should the CPO be the owner of the customer experience discipline across the organization in that case, or do you still need a separate C-level head?
I think you could make a strong case for it. I think the key there is, again, don't short shift the experience side to the regular discipline of the product side. So that's the only, but it could be a strong case.
Lisa, anything to add there? Am I argumentative?
No, I agree with that. I agree with that. I can understand the differences of what you're saying. It just so happens the organization that I was in was technology and services. So there was the BPO side of it. And, there wasn't anybody thinking about all of those different pieces. I mentioned that it became employee experience too, but one of those reasons is because I took over training. Training was something that we heard as a constant theme from our customers, that our products were not easy to use and they didn't have the right tools in order to do that. So, it was one of the areas that I took on in an attempt to solve. We did solve it. And bringing that under the umbrella of CX allowed us to fix it. So in theory, it could have then been pushed back out to the rest of the company at some point, but it needed to come under the umbrella. We looked at things like like onboarding, right? I mean, it's an HR role, but HR had condensed it at an enterprise level down to a 30-minute webinar, and people were stuck in a conference room, and that's how you were bringing employees into the business. So we said, let's look at that and determine what is the right experience that gets people excited. We're investing in employees. How do we bring them into the business? So that was something CX was able to fix.
I agree. It does provide focus, and it gives you the ability to bring in those other elements like EX, which is critical to success with a customer. It's easier to make that case if it's separate.
That's true. It's true. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to give kind of both of you kind of a quick parting shot. We've touched on this a little bit throughout the conversation. Once again, thank you both for being here. I've really enjoyed it and gotten some new perspectives that I didn't have before. I hope everyone else has enjoyed it as well. As we kind of wrap up the discussion today, and we've talked about maybe the changing nature of CX as a discipline and the changing nature of product management as a discipline, how do you both see them continuing to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years? And does that juxtaposition change, Marcos?
I go back to that point that I made earlier from my friend who, talked about the product, becoming the experience. I do believe that, as you go further down, it will be absolutely critical that the experience is the focal point to why we do a product, or why we produce what we do, what solution we provide for customers. I see that becoming stronger and stronger. At least that's from my product management, experience going forward. And then also from CX, I see, CX evolving to be more broad. There are several folks in the CX world who have been attached to voice of the customer. And voice of the customer, folks like to say, early on, it was about, it's a survey. And, so the survey, nobody does anything about the survey. And it's so that would be very frustrating, and has been frustrating for several professionals. They go, no, it's not just the survey. This is really about everything we're doing with the customer. But I see CX evolving to be one of more broad, end-to-end, including all the interactions, all the people, and again, back to the technology, and it's going to be continuing to evolve in that way. So that's kind of my view on both sides of that.
Cool. How about you, Lisa?
Yeah, you can have a great product, and you can even be in the right market and where there's a revenue opportunity. But if you are not good at articulating that value, making it easy for people to understand and find you, so the experience, the digital experience of coming in and researching all the way through, and Marcus said it earlier, all the way to contracting and invoicing and service, all of those things are the experience that matter. And that's what people want. And so, yes, at the end of the day, it is about the experience. But one thing I will add that we didn't say is I think there's also ways of thinking. So like making sure that there's critical thinking skills, and, you've got storytellers and people understanding the business and understanding the value. That are all, that those are basically traits that you look for in all of these roles, but it all comes down to the experience.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Marcos and Lisa for their insights. And this has been a great conversation, a lot of back and forth. I didn't really have to moderate anything. I just had to spin them up and throw them out there, and they just kind of went. So that was really awesome. Thank you so much for being here and for bringing your expertise and insights. And we will see you next week at Product Coffee. Thanks so much for joining us.